Those who have been following me on Twitter will know a little bit about this already, but life's been pretty hectic and terrible for me at the moment, which is awful timing considering the amount of videos I want to make about POF. We're currently 1 week away from the expansion's release, and I'm taking a brief window of opportunity here to put out a cool lore video for you all that I wanted up a while ago. And in fact, I discussed on Twitch chat doing a sort of primitive early script overview just for funsies, and I think there's a lot of meaty things to talk about. So today, guys, in as little opportunity as I can, let's talk a bit about the overarching stuff we can expect from Path of Fire's story. Now, I know that might sound a bit boring, but let me be clear here. This video is going to be very important to look back at in the future to see how well the devs really satisfied various expectations of where the plot could go. Heart of Thorns did tell what story it had very well, but one of its main problems was that it didn't discuss everything people wanted. There was stuff specifically like Malik that never made it in. There was stuff to do with the Nightmare Court that never made it in, and it really felt like that should have been a place and a time that ArenaNet should have given us those stories. So what about with Path of Fire? We know it's supposed to be a lot content heavier. We know that they've had potentially longer to work on it. I think 18 months was the official amount of time the devs have recently revealed in a blog post, and we know that they've had a much clearer idea of what they're capable of doing and in what time frame. So what are the stories that we should and could get with POF? The expansion that deals with multiple big enemies, a new region of the world that actually was an expansion or a campaign of its own a decade ago, and all the juicy stuff therein. So let's do it. Now, it's very important to me that this video doesn't become wild speculation, which is kind of my standard format, where we discuss everything and everything that's possible. No, what I really want to do is hone in on what I really think we should get, what the major set pieces will be, and the core story. You know, as we go through Path of Fire Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, and potentially Act 5, as we're experiencing that, what's going to be the main story thread, what's going to have the cutscenes, who are the characters that are going to be there, and so on. And we already have a fair amount of insight as to this. If you've been watching a lot of the pre-release stuff coming in, they've been very clear, for example, about what characters will feature prominently in the expansion, as we saw on a story live stream recently. But what about the big events? So, first of all, let's talk about the antagonists. I think that these are the safest bets, and if Path of Fire doesn't go into these guys, I think we could be looking at some real problems. First of all, Balthazar, of course. If you guys have been out of the loop, quick catch-up is that one of the human gods who had been thought to have left Tyria for some mysterious reason is actually walking among us, appears to have been outcast, appears to have lost his power. We don't know the specifics of why. They were masquerading through most of the recent story events as another character entirely, one of a lost race known as the Massart Lazarus. He was found out, and in the 5th episode of this season, it seems we had a big moment where he was trying to destroy 2 elder dragons, both Jormag and Primordus. He was seeking to take their power for himself. We stopped him, and now he's charged off to another remaining elder dragon, that being Kraukatoric in the Crystal Desert. The entire reason we're going to the Crystal Desert, and potentially then Alona beyond, is to chase Balthazar, is to defend Kraukatoric from Balthazar, is to resolve this story. So if POF doesn't deal with this basic thing, well, I think we're pretty much beyond redemption at that point. So I think it's a very safe bet to say that he will be returning. There are more specific questions that we could be asking ourselves, like when the expansion ends, is Balthazar dead and gone? Or is he now able to explain himself and he's become something of an ally? Are we going to see a big battle between Balthazar and his minions, the Forged, and us, or against another faction? And then there are other more nitty-gritty specific things. For example, an explanation of why he hid as Lazarus. Again, in some of the press stuff rolling into the expansion, the devs have made it seem like that is a question we should get an answer to, and I think that so far Living World hasn't given us a satisfactory reason just yet. But then there's other stuff like, what about an explanation as to what he was doing with Amira from Lissa? We can perhaps draw some parallels between Balthazar's fall and kind of becoming opposed to the other gods, as it seems, and what we saw with Abaddon, which was a very similar story. Maybe they can draw some parallels there. We also saw this interesting character in one of the trailers that people have speculated could be Balthazar's father, could be Menzies, both suggested to have been decapitated relatives of Balthazar, and either could be valid. And then also there's this question of, if we do defeat Balthazar, if he's an antagonist through and through, if it's all over at the end of Path of Fire and he's gone, does someone rise to take his place like we would expect someone to take the place of a fallen Elder Dragon? Are we going to get a new God of War? A huge fan favorite theory running around at the moment is people love the idea that Ritlock will take his place as the God of War. People love the irony of a Char becoming that. People feel like it's fitting to Ritlock, and I suppose answers to that will come along with another thing that we're expecting from this expansion with Ritlock too. So yeah, that's kind of the main Balthazar stuff. A little bit more explanation about the Forge, why they're there as well would be nice, but yeah, I think that's pretty solid ground. Let's move on. We, of course, have another big antagonist. We've got three. We've got Kralkatorrik. Kralkatorrik being, of course, the big Elder Dragon of this expansion. Again, a quick catch-up for you all. Guild Wars 2 has, generally speaking, been about tackling the threat of the Elder Dragons. At the release in 2012, it was about destroying one with airships. In 2014, we had Heart of Thorns, and it was about destroying one by going into its mind. Now the story has twisted a little, and we feel that we shouldn't be killing any more Elder Dragons, as this could lead to some kind of oblivion for the entire planet, or realm, or dimension, if you will. And so it's been slightly turned on its head in that this expansion, while still revolving around an Elder Dragon, as you would expect an expansion to be, it's, instead of fighting that Elder Dragon, we're kind of defending it. But we're going to be defending something that is indifferent to our existence. And so that's going to be very fun. We're going to be fighting against the Branded. We're going to be visiting more areas of the Brand. The Brand is an interesting idea to go to an expansion because there's never been any really satisfying level 80 branded content. There's been no branded dungeons, no branded fractals, no branded raids. There's been no branded open world maps that extend all the way up to level 80, and this expansion is finally going to give us that stuff and some new varieties. As for the big man himself, I think one of the most exciting questions to ask ourselves as we roll into this is, for Kralkatorrik, we asked it of Balthazar just a second ago, is at the end of this expansion Kralkatorrik dead or alive? And we really don't know. I think that's the magic of running into Path of Fire, that we don't know what these major antagonists' ultimate fate is going to be. And if he does die, how is that going to impact the rest of the world? Is that going to accelerate the Oblivion storyline? Are we going to have someone to take that energy's place, like we would suspect perhaps Orion might? And as well, I think too, when we're looking at an expansion that's very much around this dragon, I think this dragon has a lot of ties to the Char, just because of the Brand going through Ascalon, and especially maybe the Vigil more than any others, Almora, and perhaps her response to a fight against Kralkatorrik. These will be very fun things to see, and I hope we get something like that. The other thing I think should be pretty steady ground for Path of Fire, we should guess that we can probably get, is a battle between Balthazar and Kralkatorrik. So we could, in theory, just go through this expansion and thwart Balthazar in our own way, and then maybe we'll get tricked, and then Balthazar thwarts us, and so on and so on. And it's a big cat and mouse game, but we never actually see the two in the same scene. I like the idea of a final big battle where we're not just fighting an Elder Dragon this time, or defending an Elder Dragon. An Elder Dragon is just present, but also the god is too. I mean, if they manage to give us that in a Living World release in Flashpoint Episode 5, surely they should be able to do something similar here. No. So I think that that's pretty steady. And third and finally, for the antagonists, we got Pilar Joko too. Now, I already suggested a degree of uncertainty when it comes to Balthazar and Kralkatorrik, their ultimate fates. I think Pilar is even more of a curveball. Pilar could, in theory, be almost like a tertiary character in this expansion and only start coming into his own after it's over and we're moving into the next season of the Living World. That would be quite fitting to his character, playing strings, sitting in the background, and becoming something of an unsteady ally to make advances behind our backs. So what will happen with Pilar? How involved is he going to be with his Awakened? I don't know, but I think it's pretty safe to say that Pilar will be in this expansion. We will be meeting with him, we will be visiting with him in his Bone Palace, and we will learn a lot more about him and his faction. With all of that come a lot more interesting stories. Will we hear more about his struggle with Churai Ossa? Chirai Ossa is one of my favorite stories and characters in this entire franchise. I love this idea of a fallen hero, a man that does the ultimate thing for his kin and his country, and then turns it all to ash by making a huge mistake and potentially his own lust for power and just these folly mistakes that lead to the death of so many. I love the story of Chirai. I don't know how much of that will come in Path of Fire, and especially not main thread stuff, but if we're looking at Pilar, and especially if we're still around the region of the Crystal Desert, there's every bit of reason to believe Pilar might mention something to do with Chirai, right? So the other thing I think that we're going to be getting in the expansion, of course, as Pilar comes forward, is this culture warp and the fact that everyone loves him. I think that's a really interesting idea the devs have gone with there that I hadn't anticipated, but could be a very fun way of making Pilar a really nuanced enemy, more than just a blunt instrument in terms of being an antagonist. You know, a character that we hate and we have every reason to hate, but there's likable, good people who actually enjoy him for some reason, and we need to convince them that they've been brainwashed. I think those are all really fun things. But aside from that, I don't really know how much we'll get on Pilar just yet. There's no major reason he has to be a big part of the expansion. It's just that we're sort of bringing this fight to his territory, and he'll obviously react in whatever way. I do like the idea of him sitting back and just playing to the conflict to his advantage. That kind of Littlefinger, chaos is a ladder style thing. I think that's very fitting of Pilar. Now, there were ideas when I talked about this on stream that maybe we could see Pilar has actually claimed Varesh Ossa's body, and we will see something to do with Varesh in this expansion as an undead. Those are all fun theories, but I don't know whether they're core stories, and we're going down the rabbit hole of speculation. Oh lord, you have to stop me there. So that's for antagonists. I did want to talk about some other things that I absolutely think really should be in POF, and I'll be super disappointed if they're not. I think they're great, rich places to go to. So one of the main questions on the players' minds right now is, what is up with the human gods? Why did they leave? How do we think of them in terms of entities in this universe? We want answers about the gods, basically, and especially now that a god has come to Tyria, I think this expansion should be giving us them. I think a great opportunity beyond the fact that just Balthazar is around now, but for the devs to give us more on the gods, is located in the Crystal Desert. It's the centerpiece of the Crystal Desert, and our adventures there in the first game. In GW1, we went there to ascend. We went there to become closer to the gods. We participated in a bunch of rituals that Guild Wars 2 players should be familiar with if they played Living World Season 2, as you got to do sort of a mock mini version of them in the Dermot Priory Library. But we go to a place in Guild Wars 1 to ascend called Augury Rock. It's this great mesa in the middle of the desert, and once we finish these rituals that the Forgotten have challenged us with, it splits open and we can head inside to the Hall of Ascension, a golden, beautiful room with all these lovely decorations and statues of the gods. There's a lot of reason to get good god lore here. The Hall of Ascension is one of the most interesting, exciting parts of all of Prophecies, and yet, way back when, we never got much information about who built the place, or why people had built the place, or how it interacted with the gods, or how it made us close to the gods, or any of that stuff. So real, meaningful information and backstory about the Hall of Ascension, and a reason to visit the Hall of Ascension in Guild Wars 2 is super high on the list, I think. It would be crazy for us to go to the Crystal Desert amidst a storyline where the gods are involved and not go to the Hall of Ascension. I am so confident that the Hall of Ascension will feature prominently in this expansion. It would be insane for the devs not to do anything on it, and seeing it well over a decade since the last time the devs made it, because originally it was, it was original Guild Wars 1 stuff when we first got to go to the Hall of Ascension. Going there in Guild Wars 2 now, I think it's going to be really exciting. A new version of the doppelganger fight or something along those lines. I cannot wait. And then beyond that as well, I think that leads us quite nicely into another thing I'm expecting a lot of from this expansion, and that's the Forgotten. So, we haven't seen or heard anything really of the Forgotten, but the Crystal Desert was the last place we knew that the Forgotten had been pushed to on Tyria. We know that they had various places in the Mist that they were also, but the Crystal Desert was the last place they were. And the Forgotten have influenced the story a lot. They're behind the Exalted and Tyria and stuff from the previous expansion. They're potentially behind a lot of stuff to do with the Hall of Ascension. They had relations with the gods just as humans did, and I think that to do this expansion here and go into what is now Pilar's territory, if you will, but was Forgotten territory for a long time, and not talk about where they are now and what they're doing, or at least show some Forgotten, would be crazy. So I don't know whether we will see a living one, I would love it if we saw a living one. I don't know whether we will see a living one, but the fact that we should get more information on them, and I mean prominently, not just like random lore books and things strewn around some of the maps. I think actual prominent real story about the Forgotten, I think that's really important, especially if you guys do yourself a favor and replay Living Worlds Season 2 before Path of Fire comes out in this next week. You'll see so much stuff to do with the Forgotten there. This is the devs' opportunity to dovetail back to that stuff that was established back in Season 2 and make it all cohesive, make it all make sense, and explore another one of the ancient races. The Massat have had a lot of airtime during Living Worlds Season 3. Let's have a little bit of a look at the Forgotten. And don't forget, there was an interesting relationship between those two specific races set up in Season 3 as well. But I digress just a short amount. Moving on, another thing that was in the desert, if you're not going to argue that the Hall of Ascension was the big part of the desert, you can certainly argue that Glints Lair was. Now, we've already visited Glints Lair in Guild Wars 2. It was done in a weird way, but we have visited it. Will we go back in Path of Fire? Will they reuse that, change things up a bit? Maybe. I mean, I think the devs might enjoy going back and using all those old assets, which they haven't had much opportunity to play with very much since Living Worlds Season 2. But specifically, the site of Glint's death, the site of where Kralkatorrik had gone to roost for a while, the site of the climax of the second novel, Edge of Destiny. This place, I think, definitely will feature very prominently, not just as an area to explore, but in the story as well. And what we will find there, I think, is going to give us more information, not just on Glint and her final moment, but it should give us a lot, it will spiral out into a lot of other stories too. The Zephyrhites, first of all, and obviously their trek there, I think we can see some information about. But if you remember in Season 2, this whole thing with Orion, okay? Orion was in Tyria because of the egg. The egg had been given, eventually fell in our hands, but Kaith had stolen it, but it had been given to the Master of Peace. The Master of Peace had mysteriously received the egg in this location of the world as a mystery. A character gave it to the Master of Peace that we haven't had revealed. I think that that mystery will be answered in Path of Fire. I think that that mystery deserves to be answered in Path of Fire. And my guess as to who may have done this could have been Glint's first scion, Gleam, and we might even get some information on Gleam on this one as well, and we might find that Gleam had sort of orchestrated some of that. So that will all be very cool. I'm sure we will find stuff in the expansion located around Glint's Lair, and the number of different directions that that story can go is quite numerous, because don't forget, you've also got the fate of Snaf to deal with, and how the remaining members of Destiny's Edge will deal with a confrontation against Kralkatorrik. And more interestingly, the fact that we're kind of defending Kralkatorrik here, but they're going to want vengeance for Snaf. Snaf was mentioned a huge amount in the 2012 storyline and never really led anywhere. You guys might remember, in fact, I'm going to be hashtag humble bragging here, about 2 years ago, I did say that one of the best Elder Dragons to go to now would be Kralkatorrik, because to deal with Kralkatorrik and to give vengeance for Snaf and so forth allows Destiny's Edge, the original group, to start transitioning out of the story, maybe, instead of being unused. This could be a great opportunity to get Zoja back, for example, who's been mysteriously absent for so long, and those are places that all Glints Lair opens up to us. I'll be disappointed if they don't play with it to its fullest extent. Moving on, I guess I did just mention her a little bit. We do have Orion to consider. Orion, I think, is a no-brainer, is going to have something to do with this expansion. In theory, she could just sit about at Tyria and not do anything. But I think that whatever happens, Balthazar dies, Kralkatorrik dies, someone big dies, both die. If there's ever going to be some kind of big magic explosion or threat like we saw when Mordramoth was destroyed, I think Orion will be there to swoop in and consume that magic this time. I am wondering whether we will actually have a moment where we ride Orion in some kind of story instance. Looking back at the Mount livestream where the devs showed it off riding the Wyvern, one does wonder, and I know a lot of people will be excited about riding on Orion, but I think we'll see some accelerated growth from her as well if that happens in Path of Fire, so that she doesn't have to keep sitting about being cutesy all the time, but she's going to suddenly become a force to be reckoned with, and that's going to be because she consumes a ton of magic, as the fallout of this expansion might cause to happen. But taking Orion to Glints Lair, I think that all works very well. Moving into the realm of characters, we have Ritlock. They've made it very, very clear. It would be absolutely bonkers to go back on this at this point. They've made it very clear. We're getting an explanation of what happened to Ritlock in the Mist here. It's going to happen. You can't have a trailer like that, and you definitely can't have a conversation like we had in the first instance from the playable demo without finally going into that story. At what point in the Path of Fire narrative that will happen, I'm unsure. I would guess somewhere around the start of Act 3, but it should totally come. There's a deeper question there of whether we'll actually get to experience it, which would be the golden stamp of approval from me. I would love to be able to actually go to the Mists and inhabit Ritlock as he was on his adventures. Again, Living World Season 2 is a great thing to point to. Remember when we got to go into the Memory Seeds and play as Kaith and witness those events and use her skills and stuff? I'd love to be able to do that as Ritlock. Start off as a warrior and slowly unlock Revenant abilities as we travel around. But also, Ritlock is a man of many mysteries, and one is sort of what was going on in the Mist, but the other is actually the sword and how he got the sword, and I think that this would be a good thing for Path of Fire to go into also, but maybe not absolutely necessary. But hearing about that, finding out the fate of what happened to Magdea as well, since it's been unused for all this time, that'll be really nice. I do have a ton of other things on my list here for the script, but I don't have long to record this video, so moving quickly on, let's look at some locations. So, unfortunately, this is a bit of a weird thing to talk about because for a long time now, the leaks from way back when showed us all of the maps that are coming in this expansion and where we'll be able to explore. So remember, I'm not talking about where we'll be able to go, because that's pretty much a solved science at this point, but I mean what will feature really prominently in the story. And I think that seeing the ruined Vabi and the brand that is gone and scarred there is going to be a big part of the story, and probably be where it all ends, actually, in Vabi, and especially the Mirror of Liss. I think that doing something with the Mirror of Liss would be very fun. Another thing that's going on in Vabi is the hidden city of Adashim. I don't know whether that will appear immediately in Path of Fire, but it could be a candidate for Living World update a little bit later, but finding out about people in the hidden city and more Jinn lore also could be really good. Some kind of key to unlocking the final solution for this expansion story and what do we do about this conflict. Some other places I think that are going to be big story places are the Bone Palace from Pilar Joko. I think we should see him there. I got this amazing vision in my head of going into the Bone Palace and seeing Joko on his throne somehow as a callback to Guild Wars 1, but also just because that's where he rules from. And also the dam. You know, we'd heard about this dam in the Movement of the World so long ago. You can see it there on the map art now. Going to that dam, I'm imagining, is this enormous thing, a bit like the Snowblind Fractal, the start of what the Snowblind Fractal used to be like, except out in the middle of a desert, and we can climb around on it, and there'll be some kind of big story step there. I think these are all great locations and things we will be seeing outside of the other ones I've already mentioned, like Glints Lair and the Hall of Ascension. And then there's some other weird things as well. And again, forgive me for getting a bit too speculative here, but I think they should be big parts of the story. Or if I was a writer there, I certainly would want these to be. First, I already mentioned them, the Jinn. I think the Jinn have got a lot of interesting things to say and to show about magic. We already saw in one of the hero challenges in the demo that we meet a Jinn who doesn't like Tyria at the moment because the magic is too wild and chaotic and the energies are all out of balance. I think actually meeting some Jinn as a part of the story who give us some nice details about the way that magic works and stuff might be nice. But there's also the Staff of the Mists. So the character Livia has just returned to the story. She hasn't done anything yet, but clearly they're setting up for something in the future. The Scepter of Ore has just been re-mentioned in the story. There will be a reason for that. Now, the Scepter of Ore is not an artifact on its own. It did have a twin, like a brother artifact. That was the Staff of the Mist. It was destroyed by the player character in Guild Wars 1. It was cast into some like abyssal pit as far as I remember, but Abaddon's minions, the Marganites, desperately wanted it. We're going back to that region of the world, and this is like a powerful artifact, an artifact that in some way has had a little bit more light shed on it because of Livia's comments in episode 6. So considering all of that, I hope that we get more information on the Staff of the Mist. I don't know whether it will actually come in the expansion, whether we'll find some way to recover it or something, because that kind of poos on what happened in GW1, but I think that hearing some story about it might be nice. We also have the Order of Whispers. I think the Order of Whispers should be a big part of this expansion, considering this is where they came from, considering they were founded to keep Pilar Joko under guard, and Pilar is one of the main antagonists and will probably become one of the big antagonists as we conclude this storyline. So the Order of Whispers, and then details on the Order of Shadows as well that we saw in the demo. And then obviously as well, there's a couple of outstanding mysteries within the Order too. I won't go into those just yet. There's another fun thing in Vabi that I'd love to see more of. Back in Guild Wars 1, we actually oversaw the birth of a dragon there, a salt spray dragon, a Canthan variety of dragon called Shiny. It was kind of a joke quest. It was sort of played for gags a little, but as I mentioned, the hidden city of Adashim there, it'd be nice if we found another dragon that could be friendly. So that could add Orion to our roster. It could add the first Scion to our roster if we like, and maybe even Shiny. All these could be big characters for us in the expansion. That could be very fun for them to go into. And then the other thing I'd really like, we're obviously going to get background on it, but I'd really like to have a big part of the story are the Mordant Crescent. So if you guys don't know who the Mordant Crescent are, they are a corrupted branch of the Awakened, a very particularly cool version. So I'll just read you some story of these guys. Way back when we were first introduced to Guild Wars 2, the developers talked a little bit about Alona, and a lot of what they talked about with Alona were the Mordant Crescent. So now that we're finally going there, I think it makes sense not just to have them in the background, but actually be a big part of the story too. So listen to this. This is who the Mordant Crescent are. Pilar Joko took great pride in the destruction of his greatest enemies, the Sun Spears. Broken, their strongholds destroyed, their members scattered to the winds, they stood as a force no longer in Alona. Eventually, most of the populace forgot about the Order and their heroic deeds. Those few Sun Spears who survived passed on the teachings of the Order over the course of more than 100 years, holding on to the tenets of a barely remembered vision. They became wandering mystics, philosophers, and lone warriors in a world that chose to forget their presence. All but a few. Some Sun Spears, taken in by Pilar Joko's offers of power and rank, abandoned their vows. These traitors to the Order were given command of Pilar's armies or allowed to work alone against those in Alona who once scorned them. Each one, converted personally by Pilar, was given power over death and sent out to hunt down and destroy their fellow Sun Spears, or bring them before their lord to be drawn into their unholy cause. These knights, called the Mordant Crescent, became a dark presence in the sunlit southern lands of Tyria. How cool does that sound, guys? So yes, I think we will get Mordant Crescent. In fact, the playable demo talked a bit about them, but I want them as a prominent part of the story, and that's going to be quite thrilling. So I guess I'll leave it there. Already a lot of what I said here is speculative and probably isn't core story outside of the 3 antagonists we said at the start. But I think these are the major things I'm excited about. I wanted to share that with you all and see sort of some of your ideas, guys, about what you really want from this story. And remember this as well as I close the video. There's quite a high opportunity for curveballs too, and stuff we wouldn't expect at all. Heart of Thorns may have failed to give us like Malik and good Nightmare Court stuff and a few other things, but it did also give us things that I didn't expect at all but did quite well. Like, we got loads of stuff on Zin, and that was vaguely appropriate, obviously, because Zin's lair was there, but it was kind of unexpected, and they did well with Zin. The Chuck were totally new with Heart of Thorns, and they worked out quite well, I think. The Exalted, too, were absolutely unprecedented and thrown in with that expansion, and now they feel, you know, very integral to the world. So there's every bit of opportunity that, like with the Forge we've already seen, Path of Fire can give us a lot of that new stuff too, and take us happily by surprise. So there you go, guys. That's what I'm particularly looking out for, broad strokes with the expansion. Thanks very much for putting up with the delays. I'm so sad that I haven't got anywhere near as many videos as I wanted out yet, and Path of Fire is already a week away. But hey, that's life for us, I guess. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you very shortly. I hope.